All right, guys, we're going to do a QA video where I answer a question from the comments. And the question I received is pretty common. I had a number of people over the years ask me about this very same thing. So, the way this individual put it is that they're trying to master 3D modeling. They're working on subdivision meshes, but they're feeling very overwhelmed by it and not sure what to do about it. So, the trick here is it depends on what kind of objects you're going to be creating, but a lot of times just doing your standard blockout is step one, right? You don't have to create necessarily subdivision mesh at first, but you need to start creating the types of geometries that actually work with that object. And a lot of times what you'll find is you can actually convert them into subdivision mesh rather easily. So some of the previous videos I did, like the topology fundamentals or converting n-gons into quads, is super applicable to this, because if you can just model the base forms, what you'll find is that you can always take them up in resolution later on with subdivision and add additional details. Sometimes it works out better than others, but we'll kind of get into little different workflows maybe that you might want to utilize here in a bit. But some of these shapes can be very simple. They're just polygonal shapes like this, perhaps, right? You start with something like this, and then you can add, additional chamfers or bevels, whatever the case, and just start working the geometry. Now we end up with a lot of times just n-gons, right? Lots of modeling projects. With n-gons, you can't do loop cuts, so you have to get better at using tools like the knife tool, pulling things around, learning to bevel vertexes or vertices, control B and V, do that, symmetrizing, getting your shapes overall going is kind of key. If they're thin shapes, you can use things like the solidify modifier, get them going like this, and that kind of pulls that topology around to the backside, which is kind of nice when you're modeling. Turn off your modifier while modeling usually helps out a little bit, so it's less confusing. But the main thing is that once you have kind of a mesh going, you convert it to quads. So using the knife tool, you just want to start cutting in some quad shapes. It's not going to be perfect topology right away. It's not how it works. But you will get in here and start just cutting things up a little bit. And so if you can get this going to this point, this is basically a mesh that's primed for subdivision, right? It's not always the case, especially if you have curved surfaces. It might be a little bit different. You might have to add additional details, and you might need more resolution than what you have currently, but this is usually the case where something like this, and all you need is all the holding edges now, right? So a bevel modifier in our case here, mouse wheel it up once, bevel modifier, 2 segments, right? And then profile of 1, that's your Korean bevel. You can do outer emitters arc. And if for the most part you have it all set up mostly proper, you subdivide this, it'll hold shape. That's the main thing. So you want to model things to a point where that as you add that subdivision, generally it will hold the form and it won't reduce volume too much. All right. That's the main goal with that. You can see it's not shrinking much. Now, of course, it's not finalized. It's not finished. We still have additional little elements we need to work on. So we get rid of that subdivision for just a sec, convert this to a mesh, collapse our modifiers. These additional little elements is usually what trips everybody up. So KC here in this case, sometimes these edges, you can't just simply find a way to cancel them out or redirect them or whatever the case. So you actually have to add in additional geometry, keep working it basically, so that it all works out anyways. You can see, still got to do more cleanup and more work. But as long as I keep these kinds of ideas in mind as I'm creating these meshes, this works out pretty well. So it's a workflow thing. If you're starting to feel overwhelmed, that's normal. Very complex projects, you end up doing a lot of this, right? But if you keep your individual objects a little bit simpler, usually it's not so bad, right? It's not always possible. You're going to have times that you run into issues where you just cannot keep them simple no matter how hard you try. And as a result of that, you're going to have to spend more time working that topology. And that can burn you out after a little while. And so eventually we start to clean this up a little bit more, adding more loop cuts as needed to make perfect quad meshes, perhaps. That'll work out very well on a shape like this anyways. But yeah, sometimes meshes become a lot more complex. So a lot of times you're going to find that you kind of want to start with the primitives that make most sense to you, right? You're going to want to start with like cubes or planes, maybe a UV sphere or quad sphere. A lot of times cylinders, of course, and use those primitives for the individual shapes you're trying to create, the base form, without detail cut into them. So you might create the cylinder shape first, and then later on you might actually use like a boolean or a knife cut, or whatever the case, to work in that additional detail. And you're going to do these same things basically over and over and over again. So you see like this edge here would be a good holding edge on that side, this edge, loop cut that way. So your edge flows help you out quite a bit, but you can't always keep them perfect. And I think a lot of guys tend to focus on perfection a little bit too much too soon. Worry about creating the overall shapes and forms that you need, and then figure out how to turn those into a subdivision model later on. It's through practice and repetition that you're going to get better at this. You'll understand like how to work a little geometry like this, perhaps, or when you can keep things broken apart and when you should combine them together, because at some point, all of this in here, I'm going to have to eventually more than likely combine together. So it's going to be a very complex piece. But if I can figure out the topology on one little section first, then I can start to understand how I'm going to work it into the rest of the geometry. And that's when you start doing more complex subdivision, right? So more of a compound process, like you're not doing just one simple shape, a compound shape. And sometimes you can do it in parts and pieces, and you can work them together later on. It might be easier that way. Sometimes it's easier to start with the big primitive shape first and then work out all the details on it. But that's going to be a judgment call, and you learn by experience, right? So in my case, a lot of times I'm not super confident on what I even needed to do here. I'm not sure how everything needs to line up with each other. So I'm building it in parts and pieces first, and then I'll figure out how to actually start joining them together, whether that's with booleans perhaps, or maybe just doing some knife cuts and joining and merging vertices and whatnot. Other shapes will give you a lot of trouble that you didn't realize would. For example, this guy here, it's a very simple shape overall, the primary form. It's just something like a cubic shape. It's nothing too special, right? Now, the problem with this one, though, is that these cuts here for these cylinder pieces, this is going to be like 11 on the side, something like that. There's 8 on top. And those 8 on top, there's ones down the center, there's ones down the side here. And the pieces come right into the bevel a little bit. So in order to maintain cylinder shapes on bevels, a lot of times you need higher density, which means at some point I'm going to have to take these bevel counts either up and do some booleans and then clean them all up, or I'll have to work out the individual topo for at least one, and then I can start to array it down perhaps. And so in this case of this object, it's actually probably going to be easier to work out the circles on the side here first and start to turn those into the proper topo that it needs to support that shape. And then I'll probably do the one in the middle, connect them together, and then run those ones out. But because they don't line up, because this is like odd numbers, right? Like 11 and 8, they're not going to line up perfectly with each other. So the rest of the model, like I might do the individual circles, array them out, and then I got to figure out how to combine all of those without having any major topology issues anyways. And then eventually I can connect that whole patch I end up doing into these like corner caps, if you would, right? And it's because we got to do the inside possibly as well. You might be doing like not just the top side, but the bottom side of that topology. And you might be doing it over here as well. And you're going to piece all this thing together. So this ends up being one of the more complicated pieces to work on this if you wanted to create proper subdivision with it anyways, because it's very hard to get that just right. And generally speaking, it's almost impossible to create proper subdivision on everything. It's like an academic rule that, you use all quads, no triangles or n-gons. And that's great. And a lot of times you can try to do that, but there are certain shapes that when you try to model them with subdivision, they create paradoxes as far as like edge flows go. So you can't get away from using a triangle on some things. Well, it's just how it kind of works out. Now, maybe mathematically, if it was constructed just as a pure academic lesson, it would work. But with the tools that you have, trying to do edge loops and everything, it doesn't work out well. Now, not everything starts with just a cube, obviously, that you work into other shapes. Like it could start with the plane, but there's going to be times that you might start with a cube, do some box modeling, and you end up creating a subdivision mesh. So in the case of the buttstock, for example, it's very hard to get these things right sometimes when they have certain types of ergonomics to the designs and things. So you might just start with box modeling too, and there's nothing wrong with doing this. You just get in there, you add some loop cuts, you scale things as needed, because I probably scaled this wrong, but if you ever grab like a loop and you just start scaling, you'll get different thickness there. So you got to do like things like S and Shift Y possibly, or S and Shift X or whatever. All kinds of different ways you might work there, S and Z, things like that. So, but you start with this box modeling concept, and it's something you don't see a whole lot on YouTube anymore. People don't tend to like focus on box modeling in this manner, where you just go through and you're extruding, moving. Maybe some channels kind of show it off a little bit in time lapses or stuff, but box modeling was fairly common for most game art back in the day. It was very easy to do, very fast, it was very rapid to get the basic primitive shapes going. And so you might have to do this still, where you go around and you lay it all out. And then later on, you grab some faces and you just extrude them down, for example. It's just hitting E and Z maybe. Now we can shift things around and do this number perhaps, right? So we're trying to create a quad mesh more or less so that we can subdivide it. Might need some additional detail. We can add a couple loop cuts perhaps, just to kind of help control some of these curves and things, control some of the design a little bit. And then you subdivide it like once or twice and you get kind of a new shape here. And you can use creases at this point too. So if you ever felt like it was better to go through here and start creasing things, you can. So there's different strategies, and really what it comes down to is just a lot of repetition, right? Like just practicing different kind of forms, different shapes, trying to push up those levels of detail and learning by doing, right? Because creases can be super useful for holding edges, and you can start to hold edges out very strongly if you needed to for these pieces. And it's fine. It's not like the end of the world if you do that. I can get in here maybe and grab those and crease them up. We'll get something like this going. So I wanted to go over this because it's pretty common, or it might be very common at least, to end up overwhelmed with the subdivision modeling process because you just don't know about the different types of workflows to tackle different types of geometric forms. It happens. You might be doing like a subdivision at first like this, and then you can go through and you can apply a subdivision or two. Like it's mostly all quads. It's mostly nice, even geometry. So we apply it. Might not need the creases at this point because we can now add holding edges in, things like that. So now we would have more geometry in here possibly to help us start working these kinds of things out. Unfortunately, when you're doing like cylindrical shapes or like half circles, this tends to add up a little bit, right? You need quite a bit of geometry to support that. And sometimes it becomes unreasonable to work with. Like we can take it up another level of subdivision, but look at where we're at now with this. Like this is getting a little bit unreasonable perhaps. So this is kind of the trick. Sometimes you got to do a sculpt and you have to retopo it in order to create a good subdivision mesh. So don't be afraid of these tools. You know, start looking into them. Your Control F menu, your Control E menu, your Control V menu. You hear this a lot in YouTube videos that people are like boolean n-gon workflow or subdivision workflow. Don't worry about the workflow aspect of it necessarily as far as like these buzzwords that you hear online. Think of everything as modeling tools. Subdivision is just a modifier, guys. It's just a tool. So if you can use it to round out surfaces and you create a quad mesh in order to do that, that's fine. That's just a tool. You can apply it, right? But sculpting also is modeling tools. So if we weren't using subdivision over here, instead you get rid of it, and in sculpt mode, you hit Control 1 through 5. It'll add a multi-res. You can turn the preview up too. If you feel more comfortable getting in here and trying to nail down shapes with the sculpting tools, now it's going to take you some time to, of course, get better at using these things perhaps, but you could possibly get in here with enough resolution. You can start sculpting this kind of detail out possibly. It's very challenging for this particular one. It's something like the blob tool, set full strength and setting it to negative in this case. Alt E using a line tool or line stroke. But it's possible that you could do this. And that's the main thing I'm trying to point out here, is that we can get in here now a little bit. And if we're very careful with laying things like this out, instead of trying to model this right off the bat, we could retopo it, right? It's a very possible thing that you could try to do. And you're going to find that a lot of shapes that you end up working on, you end up doing things like this, right? So it's very common, and it's going to happen all over the place. For example, this little front section over here. Let me duplicate and just pull it out for a sec so we can work on it over here. We'll delete that and get rid of that one too. But, let's go over this one again real quick. Retopo, because we're not going to do retopo in the next one. But basically, we got this mesh going. If you have a mesh and you have machine tools add-on, you select the face, you just tap 4 with smart face or smart vert or whatever, and you just tap 4, it separates it to a new object, gets rid of the modifiers. This is exactly what you need to start a retopo. It's just one face. And you use snapping, face project. Sometimes you might want to use retopology shading up here in the top right. This is retopo, guys, without the shrink wrap modifier. You can also add shrink wrap modifiers to this process. But it's the main idea is that you're snapping to the surface and you're going to reconstruct everything, right? Maybe not the most thrilling or exciting way of working, but you can see even just like duplicating faces sometimes can be useful. You might have to rearrange them later on. That's fine. You can usually grab things like this and extrude them. And because it's automatically snapping right now, it'll all go to the surface. And we can start to reconstruct this area by retopping. So a lot of guys get really kind of maybe a little bit overwhelmed by the idea of doing retopo, right? Because you hear a lot of people complain about it, like retopo's hard and all that. It's really not. All you're doing is subdivision modeling on top of a surface. So as long as you're creating proper topo here, your geometry should look pretty good by the time you're done. You might still have to go back and add holding edges in and things like that and refine it a little bit more. But for the most part, yeah, anybody can do this. It's very simple. It's very straightforward even. You just take all these out and just be very careful when you're working with them, because obviously we can end up making these edges slightly canted and things like that. So we do have to line them up appropriately. But they probably won't be perfect. And that's kind of the key is a lot of times, you can't always get a 3D model to look perfect. So, you try your best to get it looking really well, and then you kind of move on, right? But if you go for like direct action, I would say like you kind of go for that block out, figure out your shape, your form, and then you start thinking about all the different tools you can use in order to make that thing work out. Then you can do that, because even if you had like photo scan data, it's going to come in looking like voxel mesh, like you sculpted it using the voxel system. Okay. You're probably going to have to retop with that. Maybe not. Maybe you can get away like decimates and stuff. But if you're trying to get perfect subdivision mesh, you'll have to retopo it probably. So just keep that in mind. You have lots of opportunity on options in here to your work your geos the way you need to. And it's really not that crazy or that complicated once you start understanding it. And I think a lot of guys tend to be, when I get asked this question anyways, they tend to be beginners, or they're maybe they've been modeling for a little while, but they just haven't really dug their teeth into all of the different tools and how to utilize them when modeling or sculpting or whatever the case. And that's a little bit of a problem, because you need to start being able to figure out what to use, when and where. And if you're still struggling with simple things like extrusion, bevels, insets, knife tools, things like that, and you're having a hard time just hitting basic primitive shapes while poly modeling it without worrying about subdivision, this is when this kind of becomes overwhelming, I think, more than anything else. And you'd be surprised about the number of people that are still kind of brand new almost to 3D modeling, even if they've been trying to do it for a few years, but they haven't really, figured out some of the basics in Blender, like orbiting in the viewport. Like just orbiting is great, holding shift and panning while middle mouse clicking, or control middle mouse. But there's also, you can alt middle mouse and kind of view areas. This kind of stuff is super useful for just navigating the viewport, so you can have a little bit of a better time working on your objects, because alt middle mouse just kind of keys in on that surface you're clicking on. So if I wanted to go view this corner, boom, I don't have to fight as much when I understand how to orbit, And plus, you select an object, you forward slash, you isolate, that's great. In edit mode, you can always hide a surface, not a problem. And so you end up in this territory now where you're working on these things. You can set maybe colors at random so you can see different surfaces. Hopefully, in our case, we still can't see that one, but yeah, we could definitely do these kinds of things. We can add a shrink wrap to this if we really wanted to. And we can pick the base object. And now, we could just use nearest, and we can offset it a little if we wanted to. And, or we could try switching it up. Maybe we use project. Sometimes project works as well. You do project with negative checked, and a lot of times that one can work pretty well. You still might be able to offset it a little bit. If it's not offsetting, I might have these faces kind of calculated backwards or something. But in whatever case, yeah, it's just kind of acting goofy right now, isn't it? Whatever the case. Sculpt mode. In sculpt mode, you don't get the retopo shading, so it's a little bit harder to work with maybe, but things like relax slide, you don't have a relax tool inside of the edit mesh tools. So like like Loop Tools has a relax, but it's a little bit different when you're in edit mode. Like this doesn't do the same thing as a regular relax would. Blender needs to kind of add that to maybe like the Control V menu or something, so that we can do proper relaxes with within edit mode. But relax slide in sculpt mode, when you hold shift down, it relaxes everything and it tries to preserve volume basically. When you combo that up with a shrink wrap, it's actually not that bad. It works pretty well. So, but you can see it all starting to come into being right there, and it's trying to do its thing. You can see that offset's now taking effect quite a bit. So usually, typically, I don't really mess with that too much. I'll shrink wrap as needed, but I don't rely off it if I don't need it, right? So we'll try doing that again. Yeah, so that's a little bit better now. Maybe you can apply it. Boom. There we go. And so before you know it, you can start working this into a very nice looking subdivision mesh for a very complex sculpt, maybe even. But you'll have to go through the whole thing. So I did want to go over that because I think it's quite critical. Let me turn that retopology shading off and come back over here to this guy. I wanted to talk about this one a little bit. A lot of you guys try to do things at the wrong resolutions as well. So in this case of this one, I need a loop cut here. But when we go back through this, turn that snapping off too while we're at it, where it messes everything up. If I delete this, and I was trying to create a little cutout here, which this shape is going to need at some point. And I do this and I just straight subdivide it. Even if I was to go in here and say like bevel it real quick. Okay. And I try to get away with a bevel maybe. 2 segments, profile of 1, arc, outer emitter, and all that. It might work out okay-ish, but it's probably going to have a little bit of an issue in these corners because it's very low resolution. And one of the things about cylinders that really screws guys up, and it's not just cylinders, it's all curved shapes can do this, right? Even squared up shapes can kind of do this. But generally, it's not as bad on something that's more boxy. And the reason is that a lot of times you have those flat faces and you can collapse things to triangles and stuff there. But you can see, yeah, it's not shading maybe quite the way I want. And so it's too low resolution. That's the big problem with this one. So what I want to do is I want to actually increase the resolution. Now there's all kinds of ways you might be able to do this. So for example, the non-destructive way using the screw modifier, you could do a poke face. You alt click a edge so you get the loop going around. Select by vertex. So you switch to vertex and you hit Control I, X, delete vertices. Boom. You get the profile of exactly what that thing was, right? So now when you add a screw modifier, this is just one way of doing this. You might have to change the orientation. In our case, we do. And you can see we could do calculate order and flip if needed. And we get something like this. So this is great because now we have steps. We can increase or decrease the size of this. And we work off that profile. That might be one way you do this. Let's take it back a step. So we're not using screw thread now. There are other methods, and one of them happens to be creasing. The trick with creasing, it really helps maybe if you inset this one first a little bit. You don't have to, but you can also maybe inset this one a little bit as well. And then what you do is you add creases to all these edge loops. So Alt-Shift-click around, select all those, Shift-E it, and then boom, you got creases. So you Control 1, you can subdivide now, right? And so if you don't have those creases where you need them, which in this case, I forgot this one, it's not going to hold the shape very well. But basically, now you can see what's going on. If I turn optimal display off, I can control 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay, so I set a resolution that I need in order to support this cutout that I need up here, and I apply it, right? So I can convert to mesh. I can grab the vertex in the middle, control number pad plus. You can do that. If I try to grid fill this, Control F and grid fill, it doesn't work because you can only do one at a time, all right? Do that again, Control F, grid fill. There you go. You can set your grid fill up however you need to in order for it to work out. I'm going to just use the default there, but it'd definitely be more correct than that. This one's way wrong, actually. All right, maybe we fix this one a little bit. We'll add some cuts, and we'll rotate it around. Boom, offset it. There you go. So now we can get rid of those creases. We won't probably use them. Probably don't even need the sharps anymore, so we can just get rid of those. And we'll leave it shaded smooth. And at this point, now we can get in here and we can kind of reconstruct this area. So all of this, I need to cut it in. We're going to delete it. We're going to grab right here. We can do a fill, do faces by selecting an edge. If you have parallel edges, you can fill something like so, right? I can actually take these all the way back out to this front one here, or close to it. We don't have to take it all the way out. Then we can add that loop cut back in. Boom. There we go. Now we can grab that edge, fill, and fill. All right, so that's a quick way of patching that area up real quick. But even without a bevel on this at all, you'll see it does a lot better. The resolution of the cylinder, the circumference, the amount of vertices on the circumference, kind of controls how sharp these can be sometimes. So a lot of times your cylinders are probably too low resolution. You didn't realize it was going to be a problem until later on. And if we try doing this now with a bevel, so we do the bevel, 2 segments, that outer emitter to arc, profile of 1, 2 segments, and get it going here. You can see it may go a little bit crazy for a second, but the idea, turn loop slide on or off if needed. But yeah, the idea is it's going to do something like this, right? So you've seen these topos before in videos, and it's once you start looking for it, you start to recognize it, right? So you join those 2 verts there. This doesn't guarantee that you're going to get proper topo here. It's better if this was closer, okay? Generally speaking, because a more correct setup here would be actually an edge going out in like both directions, but that doesn't match our geometry right now. So it wouldn't look quite right and it wouldn't work. So in our case, we can join to here, and this might be our best option for this particular piece at this moment. As far as the other ones go down here, you can see like you could try to connect these 2 perhaps, or you could do the same thing. You can just run them out to the corners. So the whole topology fundamentals video was mostly about this kind of idea of doing like redirects and talking about edge flows a little bit, and then showing how to do concave and convex corners and how an inset, an extrusion, a triangle all create end poles, and we end up with the quarter inset kind of topology anyways. So a quarter inset topology is going to be where you get the end poles, etc. And so the whole idea was that hopefully it would kind of wake you up to the patterns that you're going to see. So that way you'd better be able to manage these kinds of things as you're creating them. But really the workflow itself, you've already seen it online in a bunch of places. It's usually block something out, create it at the right resolution, and then work out the topology, right? In our case here, like I don't mind using triangles, generally speaking. It depends on what you're using your mesh for. If you're going for like super professional VFX work, obviously cleaner topology is going to be better. For my personal use, I usually use high poly mesh for high to low baking, generally speaking. So in that case, I can do what's called improper subdivision modeling. It doesn't really matter if it's clean or if it's not. Like as far as like the topology goes, it doesn't matter if it's perfect topology, because technically those are quads too. But you can see we still got a little bit of weird shading going on in here. I'm not sure what happened there. I think it's just not flat. So if we can try to get a hold of this whole area here, you can press L, select by sharps. If I can get a hold of that, probably S and Y it and SY and 0 real quick. Yeah, it wasn't flat. So the flatter it is, obviously you don't have all that weird stuff going on. All right, so yeah, if you're feeling overwhelmed by the whole process, that's normal. I mean, in reality, when you're creating something, and you can watch tutorials even of guys creating subdivision meshes on YouTube, right? And those tutorials, when they're doing a full project with subdivision, they can be pretty lengthy. I'm talking like some of those videos that I've seen, they're like 50-part videos, and each section runs 20, 30 minutes at least. And so when you're doing something crazy like a weapon, you know, break it down into simplified parts and pieces as just basic polygonal mesh before you worry about proper topology. Don't let it overwhelm you, because all of these little exercises that you see guys doing on YouTube, where they're like, this is how you subdivide this, or this is how you subdivide that. There's little time-lapse videos sometimes that show that as well. That's what they're doing, is they're more than likely starting a block out. Then they're going to start combining. Maybe they start with 2 different shapes. They combine them together, kind of like those pipe exercises you see online. That's the same thing, guys. Like those pipe exercises are very valuable, because you might have to join cylinders together at weird angles sometimes, right? And so if you have a pipe shape and it's something like this, and you have another pipe and it is going to intersect with this, you know, compound shaped, guys, intersections, you have to know how to work with these things. And so when you're doing subdivision and you have this arrangement, usually you got to pay attention to your edges and make sure that, you know, these objects are about the right resolution for what's going on here. You can see kind of messed that up, but all of these should kind of match each other to some degree. And around here, it might start falling off a little bit, but you could probably work some of these out over here. No problem. Now, that's the trick to it, though. The whole time you're doing your block out, you're thinking about edge alignment, density of the mesh, how you're going to work it out. So subdivision, oftentimes, once again, it's learned by experience, by doing a lot of times, right? And so when I'm looking at something like this and I'm thinking I'm going to have to combine this shape and this shape and this shape together along with this one, that's a lot of stuff to combine together. Now I got to do this one down here maybe as well. Who knows? But it's a lot of stuff to combine together. Actually, that one, no, these ones. Now, if I have too many edges coming out of these guys right off the bat, that could be a little bit of a problem, because when we start doing booleans and we start joining them together, it's going to be more work for me to do. Or if I have little slight holes in things, right? All of this starts to add up very quickly. I might not want a little hole there, okay? Now this one, maybe there can be a little hole, but it can be a little bit tricky sometimes when you're starting to compound things together, because it might be better if we end it right there necessarily. And so later on, you know, all this gets joined together. Now we're going to be looking at all this, and let me just duplicate it real quick and convert it to a mesh. Won't be able to boolean it right now because I have to make it solid first before I can do that. But I'm just going to join it together and kind of go through the exercise, maybe stitching it back together when it's non-manifold. Who knows? Might end up doing this too. Like backside faces, we're not going to end up using, right? Get rid of those. But yeah, this was a subdivision mesh. It was prepped for subdivision anyways. And now we're trying to combine it together with our blockout. This is a lot more work than it needs to be, right? So doing all this first on this piece sometimes isn't actually as useful as you think it is. It might actually hurt you in the long run. But however, you know, we can still get in here and we can say like we need an edge coming this way and we need an edge coming this way maybe, right? And at some point we can maybe join these two edges together. You see where I'm getting at with this? So now this one, you can slide right there. We can move it there. Oh, you can see it pops around too. All right, let's not do that too much. But we might be able to get in here, merge them together. Okay. We still have interior faces here, I'm sure. So we'll have to cut those out at some point where, you know, this whole interior face gets cut out, which we can't even see that well. And this is where working with Geo in this manner is actually pretty troublesome or problematic. But a Boolean should clear this out. Whereas like if we're doing it by hand and manually, you might have to do cuts in certain views and all kinds of other nonsense, because I can't even get that cut going for some reason. So it's rather bizarre, actually. Maybe it's not the right edge, but yeah, it's quite a bit off the way it's trying to behave. And yeah, so that's not even working right now. That's nice. Why is it not working though? Okay, so we're trying to cut from here. I can't even get a hold of it. Jeez. Blender doesn't like this kind of work, generally speaking. Cutting it from the back probably might work. I don't know. Yeah, so a lot of times you got to leave them separated as different parts and pieces and then clean them up before you join them because it's crap like this. But you can also try maybe getting into wireframe, and that might work. Wireframe sometimes does work out. But man, I don't know why we're having such issues with this one. Because it's really this edge down here that we need to cut from and to. And when that other face is in the way, it doesn't seem to like that at all. All right, that's going to ruin my whole demo here. Anyways, yeah, so that's problematic. I would go ahead in this case. I'm just going to blow them apart again. Separate by loose parts. Because I know these are not working out for me. Oh, you see, they're already joined together. They're not loose parts anymore. All right. But we can still work with it like that maybe for a bit. Yeah, so it's at least cutting now. The other thing's out of the way. So we can bring that one over. We might be able to do a knife cut somewhere down here for now. I'm just trying to create this vertex to merge it into there. And then I can dissolve that edge. So you got to learn how to manually like deconstruct things and put them back together sometimes. Because a lot of times you'll find yourself still having to do stuff like this, even during blockout. If the Boolean, like you tried to use a Boolean and it didn't work out and you got to manually stitch things or whatever the case, you know. Put them back together basically, right? All I'm trying to do here is get this one going just well enough that I can merge them together. And I should, if that happens correctly anyways, should be able to delete the interior face. We can use vertex snapping at this point too. I don't know why I'm trying to do this all by hand. Vertex snapping is huge, guys. Learn about your tools. Learn about transforms, median, the transform orientations, the pivot points, and snapping. Super useful. In the case of this guy here, I can just hit GX, hold control, boom, it snaps right into position. This one over here, I could just G, hold control, snap it there maybe. You know, later on we can line all these up, GY and hold control needed. So when it all merges finally, there should be a face that's cut in this area at some point, which we don't have yet, but at some point there will be. This green color's kind of not working for me yet. Like just a random cut out to here, for example, and then we can merge verts. Kind of a weird thing about it. And as a result of that, do we have it yet? Do we have the faces in here cut out the way? We need to delete one side for sure. We'll delete this side. Like these will have to go because these already have bevels on it and it's already set up for subdivision. You see, it's just going to complicate it, right? So that's not what you're trying to do, generally speaking. I'm trying to do things kind of wrong here so you guys better understand a little bit what I'm talking about maybe. But yeah, so those are kind of wrong. That's okay. We have these all joined, but there's no edge going from here to here, I think. Right? So I'm going to hit J. And that should create a face in the middle. Maybe. And it did not. So yeah, all this excess in here, just get rid of it. You got to clean things up sometimes. Yeah, it happens. With booleans especially, right? Like you're going to be doing a lot of that. You can press AX limit dissolve as well. Type in 0.05 so it doesn't dissolve too much. That can be quite useful because it's going to clear out all those bevels that I had a profile of 1. So just keep that in mind. I don't know why I didn't do that earlier, but there you go. I don't think I would approach this in this manner necessarily, usually, but you can see it does, in fact, start to work out, though. Where's this going? Down there? Okay. Yeah, we should have a face in here before we know it. In our case, it does not seem to be so. See what happens if I merge that down. Maybe that'll create it. Well, not yet, huh? Yeah, so basically, they are combined by the looks of it. So I move them around temporarily just to see if they're combined. Maybe there's not a face in there. Maybe I'm just imagining things. No, there's a face. Okay, so which one is it then? Is the big one? Little one? This one? One of these faces is still in there. That one. Okay. So this needs to cut, basically. All right, so if I cut here to there, merge that back, I should now have an individual face in the middle. There. Now we can delete it. Jeez. What a pain that was. But yeah, so we can do things like this. I mean, it's not impossible. It's just a real pain sometimes, right? We got like this extra vertex now. Like, why do we need that? No idea. Don't. All these extra verts going down or edges. You just select edge, Alt Z. You select everything, select all those. Control X them, boom. All right. Yeah, so basically you have to go through and clean things up sometimes. It's not so simple and straightforward always, you know, but you can reconstruct this into a basic, decent quad mesh, perhaps, if you needed to. Try to preserve curves if you had them or whatever the case. But this is going to be a better point for this one than where we were anyways. So even something like this, we just cut back down. And then like this section here, get rid of. So we can do a loop cut here, join these up. Because now what you're doing is you're basically converting n-gons into quads, right? And you're doing that across the whole object, right? So like you're going to go through, make it happen, basically clean up the model, get rid of, like there's just nonsense in here sometimes. You could try running machine tools, clean up features. Sometimes it helps. Sometimes it doesn't get everything. So you'll have to still clean up a little bit. Get rid of some of these bevel weights and sharps and everything else and shade it flat for now. We don't worry about the shading just yet. Help us work on this maybe. Dissolve that one, clean it up, get it going. Sometimes you got asymmetrical objects and some parts of the mesh might be symmetrical, some of it might be asymmetrical. That can always throw you for a loop. So you'll end up working the mesh in different little sections perhaps so that you can still symmetrize certain things. You might separate them to a new object temporarily or join them back together later. But yeah, basically this is the process, guys. And it's not super exciting for beginners to do this. And I know when I first started subdivision, a lot of times I thought the same things a lot of beginners thought, which is like, who the heck came up with modeling in this manner, you know? Like this makes no sense. As you do it more and more though, it starts to become very predictable. It's not really that bad. You're just going to get in and, you know, do whatever kind of work you got to do and then move on, you know, to the next object and then do the same thing. And if you keep a kind of a rhythm to it, you'll actually work through the whole project a lot easier perhaps. And so Sometimes if an object's simple enough and I know I can subdivide it right off the bat, I'll just model it, create the bevels or whatever, make it a subdivision mesh, and then move on. I don't think too hard about it. Other times I get a little bit more skittish about it. I might just leave it as like basic geometry without any additional edge cuts. Just leave n-gons and stuff until I figure out exactly what I'm combining, when and where, and all that fun stuff. But I need that base geo to be right, the base forms, because if like I can always cut in like cylinder shapes in this later on, right? I can't do like if I start cutting in cylinder shapes right now, we're gonna have more geo to worry about. And so I try to keep it simple as long as I can. And then after, I start to look at this, I'm like, yo, this is mostly working the way I want. Great. I can get in here and I can now use like a bevel modifier, perhaps 2 segments, profile of 1. Boom. This is mostly going to subdivide now at this point. It may not subdivide perfectly, right? But it's mostly there. So sometimes you have to add additional loop cuts, or in my case, I'm going to KCA and do some knife cuts. You want to square things out if possible so that they're not big rectangular shapes. You might have to do like a loop cut down the middle of the whole thing, perhaps, or a couple here with that bevel attached to it. Now, it should look pretty good overall. In our case, it might not still, because there's still little nuanced things that I didn't quite get right, maybe, but it's getting there. Like this loop cut didn't even actually work through here for whatever reason. It went and stopped. I don't know why it's stopping, because there's probably, nonsense over here too that we got to clean up. Okay, and that does happen, so you'll have to go clean it up. We got to do a bunch of knife cuts for these guys as well, apparently. I didn't really think about that, but yep, a bunch of knife cuts to help support those shapes. KCA these. Could be useful. You see, I'll just KCA all these down for now. But yeah, sometimes you get in these little situations where you have to do the cuts, like slightly crooked. We could probably redo that one. I don't think I would leave it that way. But sometimes it's annoying. So a lot of times if I do it slightly wrong on one, I'll just keep moving just so I don't have to worry about that one. And I'll come back to it. Otherwise, you got to stop what you're doing, I'd rather go back and just make corrections if possible. But yeah, this is maybe a little bit annoying, but this is part of it. From here, this is when you can add your subdivision to it. You can apply a subdivision. You can add more detail to it. You might take it up in resolution. Not really a big deal, especially if you're using creases. It works out quite well, but not always. Sometimes you have to use the bevels. So yeah, don't get overwhelmed by it. It's just one piece at a time. Take your time to learn how to, do as much subdivision as you need to know how to do. But you can see once those are all cut out and this bevels, there's a good odd chance a lot of this will start working fairly well. Okay. And like, look, if we want to increase resolutions, guys, we can add some loop cuts now, because we've set this up in a way where, we know it's mostly going to work out pretty well. And it's pretty close to like perfect quads now and all that fun stuff. So the bevel's added, the holding edges basically. So it should be able to subdivide at this point, no problem. You can shade it smooth again, perhaps. Dude, you cannot get cleaner workflow than that, right? Like, learn how to do this, practice it, do examples, or do practice projects, little pieces that you want to practice on anyways. That was just one piece, right? So now I got all this geo going on this one. And if I had to join it to this one, it's going to be maybe a little bit harder to do. But in some ways, it's actually kind of easier too. So there's going to be times you actually do it when they're higher resolution like this, because you might not leave the bevel active. It's best not to do the bevel yet, or the subdivision for that matter. But sometimes it's actually a little bit easier to work this into this piece if we have all these extra edges going in this manner, because we know this is the kind of topo we want for this. Now we just need to know what kind of topo we need for this. And then eventually we can work out how we're going to fill all these gaps in anyways. So think of it like this. Instead of worrying about corners and stuff, we worry about the big grid patches first. So like KCA, you just do some knife cuts here. So I want an edge that matches that edge. I want an edge that matches that edge. And I want an edge that matches that edge. See where we're going with this concept? Now, I'm not going to do this one out just yet, but maybe the ones in the middle, we can start to figure out. So I want to do an edge that matches this edge, and so on and so forth. So it's not impossible to do this. It's just you really have to know these different strategies to do it, right? So this is why you're getting overwhelmed more than likely, is it's just a lot of stuff to take in sometimes, right? Like I know if I send this one backwards this way, it'll probably line up to that one at some point. It's not going to be a big deal. This one over here, going back this way, probably will be okay. We're not cutting into a cylindrical shape or a curved shape generally when we're doing knife cuts like that, then we're going to be better off for it. But these other ones we might have to figure out in the middle, okay? This little edge here probably doesn't even need to exist necessarily, right? Not in that manner anyways. So basically we're going to have two more that come forward, and I would just cut them in like this for now. Get them forward, and we'll figure them out from there, okay? We know we want to kind of do the same thing, so that's what we do. Right, and how it matches up over here on the side, on the back side, we're not working with this piece right now. Actually, I'll just delete that for now. But yeah, you can see where this is going to start going at some point, right? Like they should have a similar matching type of setup here in the back as well. So this edge, use machine tools, Alt-A, align it to the right or left, and slide it around real quick. Okay, we're golden now, right? Like we're starting to plan this thing out. And this is where a lot of guys just go wrong. They don't plan them out like this. I want these to cross right in front of this one, perhaps, right? We could leave them out a little bit if we needed to. It's fine. So that way it's easier to work with, perhaps. We'll just slam them into the other one later on. But the moment these become solid objects, like we're suddenly going to be a lot better off, because basically you can see it's already starting to work out pretty well. With the fills there, all the vertices are matching and even and all that. But basically we could boolean union these things together too, and we'll have a much better time. So like this, yeah, obviously we would have that other piece probably inside this area, but like this could be joined basically, right? We wanted it to. Make sure they're intersecting slightly, and then you could do, let's do this one to this one, and we'll use auto boolean with bool tools. We'll do a auto boolean union basically, right? And that should, in my case, it'll use a manifold boolean. It does that. I guess it doesn't have a menu for it, but it does a manifold boolean. Float will be a little bit dirtier, I think, but it should work out pretty well as well. Manifolds tend to be a little cleaner in my opinion, but yeah, so now you can see where this is all going. Like all of this can slide over here, and that can slide out to there. You see? We can start merging things basically. And, you know, we could turn on snapping, vertex snapping. And I don't do auto merge because I find that it causes more problems in the long run. A lot of guys use auto merge. But if you want to just do vertex snapping, it's a lot easier. And then at the very end, just merge by distance. Not really a big deal, right? So you can get in here, make all this happen. Try to get it going. These ones should have went over here. You can see that caused a little bit of an issue. Right, there you go. Yeah, so a little bit of a hanging corner here. This is the kind of stuff that can also mess you up a little bit. I'm going to merge these out for now. We'll have to add a loop cut in here at some point to fix that. And the same for like this corner here. Like we might have to join this perhaps, or we can cut it out forward, which I probably will do in a sec. So it's one of those things. Yeah, all of these here, we can just start merging up. Original goal was I was going to push these ones together right here real quick, snap them together, and then I was just going to slide all those other ones backwards. So we'll do that now. And yeah, if it feels overwhelming, I mean, that's normal. The more complicated your project is, the more of this kind of stuff you have to do, right? When you're looking at objects that you want to create, you know, if you're just getting started, start simple. Work spoons, knives, something simple. You're going to get into to a point, at least, when you're working on bigger projects where you're just doing lots and lots of this stuff, and there is no way to speed it up much faster than this. Now, there is a strategy called improper subdivision. It's something you do for high poly to low poly bakes, generally speaking, where you go through and it's not going to be quite right as far as the topo goes, because you're going to use triangles and n-gons, and you're going to try to work it out as fast as you possibly can. But it is much faster because you're not doing proper quote unquote proper subdivision, right? All right, so that one was good. I think we need more edges in here personally. I'm add one there. Oops, we don't have apparently quads all the way around, so we can't do that loop cut. AM merge by distance. Let's see if we got that yet. Oh, pretty close. The issue is actually right here. You see how the loop cut dies there and it dies there? It means there's a double in here or something like that. There's something going on. Yeah, there's a double. We merge that out. And now we should be able to loop cut. Boom. Usually that's a dead giveaway, but sometimes you can cut across n-gons, so it's a little bit problematic sometimes. But you can see I'm just increasing resolution. Is this always proper? No, it depends. Even on VFX projects where guys need subdivision mesh a lot of times, this might not be proper for them because what happens is that it depends on the shot. Like this might be too much density, right? It could be that thing. But if you're going to be creating weapons for like film, that they're going to be pretty detailed more than likely. I'm just going to give you a fair warning there. A good odd chance we hit J between those two and try to join them. Maybe we realign them or something. But there's a good odd chance they're going to be very, very detailed. You think of like scenes in some of the action movies you've seen where they have like the weapons being tossed in the air and caught and all that other fun stuff and slow motion fired and stuff. That's probably what's going to end up happening with a lot of the 3D models that you end up creating for that kind of stuff. Good odd chance anyways. At least some of that would be going on. For this, like I was saying, I was just going to cut another edge out. And we can loop cut it in here. It's not really a big deal. Let me turn that off. We can loop cut it in there because that loop cut dies at triangles and n-gons more or less, or redirects, the poles and things. So I know I'm not going to cut all the way across the mesh because it's going to die over here. And I can just move from that, basically. Like this can be loop cut too, you see. Maybe we put one right in the middle, try to attach it here. Maybe we shift this one around a little bit. I mean, there's all kinds of ways of working with things, guys. This edge was supposed to be slid back. I keep forgetting about it. But if you GG twice back, you can see you can slide it back and just get rid of it. I really don't want to do that, actually. I don't mind sliding the front ones back, but not the side ones. I don't want to do that. Okay. I'm going to move those particular like in a sec. That. So like, yeah, we'll leave those ones alone too. That way I can just GG twice all those in and they all meet up, merge by distance, boom. Done like that now, right? And then later on we can take these and just be like, yo, let's align to the right. Okay, I need this going all the way across, which apparently we lost somehow. Might have a spiral going on. That happens sometimes. I don't think we do, but it could be. Yeah, no, we don't have it. Okay. Spirals are rather interesting, and usually the way you fix them is by rotating an edge in the spiral until you make it not spiral. So, or a couple edges at least. Right? So that's a lot more involved to do it that way. A lot more geometry to work, takes longer, but it's still a decent result. It's not maybe 100% perfect, but it's on its way anyways. We can clean it up more if we need to. And if it's dense enough, you don't necessarily need to do holding edges. You might be able to just straight out bevel it. I like to do a subdivision real quick sometimes just to check to see if it works. Because when I turn it on and I'm looking for just like weird anomalies in that case, like the had weird poles there. Things like this, you can see like something's wrong here. Turn subdivision off in edit mode. Extra vertex, boom. That's going to be a correction very quickly. Got this going on over here because they're not quads right now. They're all set up like so. These are usually fairly easy to clean up. Just so loop cut across the middle, join. Keep working them out. This is like the most simplified way of doing that, perhaps. You could definitely add more loop cuts in the middle and then try to work this topo a little bit different, but that's a pretty simple setup, and it'll basically work over here as well. Surprisingly, a lot of times after you do the first one, sometimes you get away with grid fills on these, maybe, but in this case it didn't work out, so maybe not in that one. But yeah, I mean, it's just knife cuts. It's not that bad. It feels overwhelming because you're probably just not used to doing this, right? It's something that you kind of build up a tolerance to. It's like running a marathon. Like you're learning the alphabet of subdivision by learning basic topology tricks. And then later on you find out like, oh, all of this gets combined together to make very complex things. That's probably the issue because now you're running marathons instead of taking baby steps. And it's just, yeah, it can eat up eat up your soul a little bit, right? Like it's pretty stressful. Just a bevel on it won't be enough again, though, just like before. You can see bevels do quite a bit of heavy lifting here, but not as much as you need sometimes. And I'm not sure why this one's doing all weird like that. Got like a double edge in it or something. Just badly balanced. Yeah, so sometimes balance comes into play. You have to shift things just to get things to work right. If I pull that back a little bit, that'll probably work a little bit nicer in there maybe. But if not, I need to make sure I set outer emitter to arc. That's probably another reason that did that. 2 segments, factor, profile, 1. All right, that's going to help all that. Now, once again, not fully flushed out using the bevel here. It's probably better to use bevel weights if possible, but or do them destructively even. Sometimes you have to do them destructively because you might have to bevel certain things in different ways. Like you might bevel one edge first before you bevel the other, et cetera, et cetera. But for the most part, this is mostly working now. And unfortunately, you have to go kind of destructive here for this, where, you know, if we want to correct those issues, we have to collapse the bevel on this. Or you might get away with doing joins like this sometimes, and that also works. But usually on flatter surfaces, it works better. But it's basically doing the same thing that would happen if you were to collapse it. But you do end up with that extra edge, basically. So that's a rather interesting one, I think. And this one's like way far out here. It's probably not going to work out very well. This edge in particular just needs to be closer, right? Hold that intersection a little bit better. Then we can do a loop cut across there again if needed. That'll make that corner look a little bit nicer. So now when we do that, boom, it'll look, you know, as good as it's going to get, basically. It's kind of a tight intersection here on this one. And anytime you have to do this on curves, like curvy shapes, you're going to want to do the base form as either a sculpt or a subdivision mesh. And that way you can, it doesn't have to be completely, you know, modeled out, just the surface areas that you need, right? Then you'll have to use the shrink wrap method to go through and do all this on the curves. Unfortunately, Blender doesn't have great tools for working on curved meshes. Some of the features that you'd find in like Maya or Max just simply don't exist here. So it makes it a little bit harder to deal with. But the shrink wrap retopo kind of workflow is the better way of working for those. So you see, we still got other issues showing up over here. This is beveling kind of crazy like. Yeah, I think it's coming from this one. I don't know about this one actually. This is why I like applying them sometimes, but this is beveling, and I can see that didn't work, whatever that was. Might get away with this, I might not. Oh, okay. So there's just one more in there. I don't know what to do about that one now. That's rather interesting. I'm not sure about that one. So if this was collapsed, we apply the bevel. Yeah, it's doing that. That's what I thought it was doing, but these two can just connect, and then this one can run out. Oh, maybe they can't run out like that. We got to run it over. And we just make it, you know, run back to itself on the other side since it's symmetrical. So this kind of stuff, guys, a lot of this stuff going on. You have to make it happen, unfortunately. You see, that's a big stretch there. I don't like that answer. That would mean another loop cut in here would likely be needed. So before we do that one, we could do the loop cut. Also, you see we applied the bevel, and now this is all gooey, like goofy and stuff. Yeah, that's kind of another thing you got to worry about. Although it's a valid strategy, I don't think it always works out, right? We'll do that loop cut. We'll do that loop cut. We'll join these two. I know why it's complaining right now. It's because of these. So let's just move those out a little bit. This needs to be further out or closer to that side, but it can be one of those two. And ultimately, that's the kind of stuff you end up dealing with, like this whole section. I mean, I really should just probably pull that forward, not think too heavily about that one, but then it really messes up this side too. So yeah, things get a little bit goofy with subdivision, guys. Like I don't go for perfection. I don't think that's a good goal necessarily right away, especially as you're learning how to do it. Just controlling the mesh, you know, is hard enough, and then now you're trying. Like this one worked fine for whatever reason. It's awesome. just getting them all well balanced and laid out and everything else. Like this will eat up a ton of time, especially when you're not real proficient at it. And so you do want to, pick up speed at it and you want to practice a lot, do different little compound shapes, do little practice exercises. The only way you're going to get better at it. Look for these things, guys. That's the whole reason I started doing these videos, is to try to help this kind of stuff. That's complicated, right? Like it takes too long. It's like we spend an hour just working on almost one thing for the most part, besides whatever else we talked about and did. But the I know that one shape, when I compound it together, it's going to be one of the more difficult ones to deal with. And at the end of the day, this is going to be, this might not be the final form of this mesh. I might have a lot of little details in here I still got to add, where I might be doing like circles and stuff and insets and extrusions and scaling and all this other fun small detail. So yeah, they can take quite a bit to get together. And then when you try doing something like that in a very specific area, and that geometry underneath it doesn't support it, then you run into issues, right? So like in our case, the loop tool's circle, when you have it set to flatten, doesn't always work out so well. Sometimes you need it not flatten. That might work out a little bit better, right? Sometimes inset with edge rail on also will make a circle look crazy, but you see now we get this little slight pulled out section right here, and that's a little tricky, right? So in order to preserve a circle on a bevel, it's pretty challenging, all right? Especially with the vanilla blender tools, it can be pretty frustrating. We might need more resolution to that beveled cylinder shape right there, half cylinder. And we might have to cut that circle out when it's a little bit higher density than this, maybe. It's a possibility. Depends on how clean you want it, I guess. Otherwise, we have to shift the geo around. It messes the shading up a little bit, so weird things like that start to come into play. But ultimately, like, you get to this point where like you get these kinds of meshes going, guys. It's a subdivision mesh. We don't have to use subdivision. We can use multi-reses on these as well. We can subdivide it till it's very dense if we wanted to. And as a final touch, you could do that. And in this case, you probably could use a tiling on Y. I don't know if I got the origin point in the middle of this one. I do. It should be Y. I believe it is anyways. But usually it's Z, but in my case, it's Y. But yeah, if I ever had to add additional details here, we could turn that radial symmetry up high as I want it. We can start to add in or knock in additional detail with sculpting as well, using a multi-res, right? And that's kind of the trick, because I do this quite a bit on modeling projects that I'm baking. I don't know if a lot of people realize this, but a good subdivision mesh will sculpt fairly well, okay? Unless you're doing them in a specific manner where you're trying to cram the polygons into the edges, right? You're trying to cram them where you're doing a lot of holding edges and things like that. They don't typically sculpt as well as they would if you were using like just a very dense mesh, maybe. So this area, for example, like it might smooth weird or whatever if I have a bunch of geometry differences here. You see it's very thin over here. It's very thick over here. You want to try to make them balance for sculpting. And it tends to work out better. And you want to limit where the poles and the E-poles, like the E-poles and N-poles show up. That helps out quite a bit too. But ultimately, like this mesh for me is my bake mesh usually, right? So it's something kind of simple in nature, because like I could take that bake mesh, get rid of the multi-res. Now just limit dissolve all this to 0.05 it maybe. Should get rid of a lot of the topo in here I don't like if I symmetrize it up again. Maybe do a little bit of optimization. So a lot of guys like to work subdivision mesh first. And they do it in a manner where more or less what's going to happen is they can use it as a low poly as well. I mean, I don't know if you guys realize this, right? So like it's not quite super low poly here. It could definitely maybe be a little bit more optimized, but it works. That's kind of the idea. So, if you do like a checker deselect, you can reduce the resolution to some degree. The only thing that's going to have a problem on this particular one, we got to offset it and then we can do it again. Yeah, the only problem we're going to have on this one is these edges here. Like we got to preserve our top edges for sure. Now we can reduce that. But when we try to reduce these ones, you can see little tricky on this one, right? Because if we check or deselect, we might have to offset it. And when we do that, it might try to get rid of these edges that hold the geometry here, that hold the shape. In our case, we got lucky. It's not doing that. So when you're modeling, you might want to think about things like that too. Like, can it check or deselect properly? So you got to think 3 or 4 steps ahead sometimes, and maybe not. If not, maybe through the whole process. Even like you got to think like, what are we trying to do with this model ultimately? We're trying to get it back to that down to this level. I mean, that's pretty low res. But yeah, you could build something up like that if you do it in a very meticulous manner. You can break them back down very quickly. And so now we got high and low. And this is historically how I've always worked with subdivision, right? Like would make the blockout meshes, I'd combine them if needed, and do booleans if needed. I'd work them into quads to the point that I could turn them into a good multi-res sculptable mesh anyways, or a good subdivision mesh, mind you, because I would take that sub D mesh more or less over to ZBrush and I'd sculpt on it. But this is the idea, or Mudbox even. I used to use Mudbox quite a bit, but the tools are here in Blender. So, I mean, create a multi-res mesh, subdivide it with that, and then sculpt on it a little bit, break it back into a low poly. You have your high and your low. All right, and you do that for every little section, every little thing, basically. Flash suppressor zone, or flash suppressor is its own thing, right? Flash hider, muzzle brake, whatever you want to call it. This here, same thing. Make a high and a low, make a high and a low, make a high and a low. Before you know it, you break it out into like logical order. It works out pretty well. Now, sometimes, occasionally, you're going to find that it doesn't always work out that way. Sometimes you have multiple objects, like you're going for like a bake where you want all of this combined, maybe, right? Your low poly might get combined together, but your high poly might stay in separate parts and pieces to some degree. So don't be afraid of doing that, because it's a possibility, right? Like maybe not the butt stock. Maybe we do this whole section here otherwise, though, as like one piece, all of this. Okay, so we can break, the subdivision mesh, the high poly could be a bunch of parts and pieces perhaps. But the low poly, when you start working, it might just be like this whole thing as a chunk combined together and reduced in triangle count and optimized, basically, right? So just keep that in mind, that the low poly does not always look like the high poly, but it's easier if you make the high polys somewhat more realistically to how the real life, real world thing is put together. Not always, because at the end of the day, if you're doing a baked mesh, you don't always need the depth that you have on the real things. Because if your low poly is going to have a completely flat side here, there's no point in like pulling this out realistically as far as it needs to go necessarily. You just need to make it so that the normals would look good there, which is a little bit hard to master perhaps, because you do have to go through the whole modeling process more or less to kind of get to that point to test that idea. So little simple practice projects, again, probably going to benefit you the most. But yeah, this is how it goes, guys. I wanted to make a pretty lengthy video talking about it because it is overwhelming. And I see guys say the same thing all the time, where it's just, it's too much sometimes. Like feels very overbearing and overwhelming. And, just take your time on your pieces, like this section here, like certain workflows can make this a little bit easier perhaps to deal with ultimately. Like if I join these two together with a Boolean, that's great. And then like there's the remesh workflow. Maybe you can get away with that, and you can remesh something perhaps and smooth it down, and maybe you can do that. Maybe these base shapes, you can add subdivision to them perhaps. That helps it out too, for a remesh workflow, because I can add another subdivision or two and have it perfectly smooth. Other things like this, a remesh workflow on this doesn't work very well. There's certain shapes that just really doesn't like the voxel remesh. In this particular one, this reason is because there's a slight little taper to this whole edge, and it goes across the voxel grid. So basically, voxel system is like a little grid. It's like a little SDF field, something like this anyways. And so every time you cross that grid, it creates those little poles in those areas for whatever reason, and little lines and stuff. So that's what's going on there. So even if I smooth this out, the remesh workflow here with voxels doesn't work. Quad remesher can't pick up on this shape for whatever reason very well. It does well enough, but it messes up in the barrel for some reason. I'm not sure why that is, but so, usually I will try a standard regular remesh. I'll try a quad remesh. If those don't work, that means I'm going to manually retopo it and do subdivision for the high poly model to bake it, right? It's just typically how it goes. In this case, you pull this one out, you see fail, right? Big time fail even off the voxels, which is pretty rough. So in that case, I'd have to go through here and go through that same process we just went through. I might convert it to a mesh first. Make sure it's all lined up first before I even do that. But I might have to go in here now and start cleaning things up and working it out, right? Same process, same idea. Lots of little work to do. We got more curves in this one, so it'd be more painful to do, perhaps. But if your vertices and your edges line up with each other a little bit better, it's much easier to work out, right? And then you'll have some very narrow areas, perhaps. You might want to try to reduce some of the density in some areas. All kinds of other little things that can happen. But basically, you go through and you start working it out. And yeah, this is the part that slows you down. So it's going to be even worse, though, if you don't prep for it, right? Like you don't think ahead. You don't think about doing it in this manner. It's going to get even worse because you see some of these booleans are pretty rough. So I can't symmetrize because it's not in the center of the object, obviously. I'll set origin to geometry. It may or may not work depending on if your object is symmetrical or asymmetrical. Mine's actually slightly, origin point's slightly off because it's slightly asymmetrical right now. So that's not going to be the center point anymore, not the way it should be anyways. And I got to clean all this stuff up in here. There's a bunch of like just extra vertices that got like whatever reason this Boolean method decided this was good. I don't think it is. You can see that's a problem, right? So, S shift Y merge. Oops, sorry. S shift Y 0 merge at center. Excuse me. Merge by distance, maybe. Yeah. Sometimes you got to do weird things like that. Not a big fan of it sometimes, but can I even get a hold of this edge? What's going on here? Okay, I can, but there's extra verts on it. Sometimes machine tools cleanup feature will actually get rid of those extra verts too. So you can hit 3 with machine tools, try that out, see if it works. Might get a hold of this whole edge if we can freaking select it. Nice. If we do select it, in select with mesh machine, boom, you get the whole edge. Blender's selection tool needs improvement. There's a lot of things in Blender that need improvement, but the devs don't pay any mind or attention to some of the things that people have requested over the years. Like the ability to select to seams, for example, or other edge selections would be nice. That we don't have to fiddle with all that necessarily and maybe adjust how. But yeah, we'll have to clean all this up basically. A lot of little caveats to Blender and its tools, and I can't slide that. Oh, okay, now it slides. All right. Like that's a little bit odd. Point those. I have to merge that out or dissolve it, or I'm all over the place now. So yeah, that needs to get manual rework. Basically, is all I was saying. It happens, and it just takes time to do all that. So it's going to feel like you're dragging, but start with the blockouts first. Generally speaking, it's easier. Like I used a subdivision mesh to generate this shape, right? And then I used a Boolean to cut that in, and then I reworked it a little bit manually. When it starts to subdivide up, it's decent. It's not maybe perfect, but you can see the reflections. It's decent enough that I don't think most people would notice in a video game or whatever. So I'm not going to go the same lengths I would as if I was doing a supercar or something like that, where you have big body panels that are very easy to spot reflection issues. But yeah, I mean, basically this is the idea. This is 3D modeling in a nutshell, guys. You create a base shape, you bevel it, you create something basic, you start to make it nicer, more or less, right? Very simple of an idea. As far as other models I can really show off with this kind of stuff, I mean, there's all kinds of things out there to create, obviously, different weapon models. So even on like an AK, even though this might not be entirely correct here, because I don't usually model AKs a whole lot, but it's kind of the same idea. You just start with something simple, get it kind of going. And look, it's the same process, guys. It's KCA, boom. Work out quads if you can. Might add bevels later. Don't worry about perfection usually, because I'm trying to move. And so we'll get through this, no problem, at a certain point, right? I think it's already pretty decent. Let me turn box cutter off before it causes too many problems. Um, Pretty decent. So if I just bevel it a little, hard ops bevel's a little sensitive sometimes, or I'm at the right resolution. It might be because of that. So, but yeah, I mean, basically, is this perfect? Absolutely not. Could we add another loop cut in here? Probably. And since loop cut didn't work, I'll just do KCA. I'll just keep all that a little bit further down here because we still got ingons, and some things aren't quite flushed out. Maybe like I need these to bevel, and they're not beveling right now. There's, yeah, it's just not doing it. I'm not sure why not though. It's just the angle amount or something like that. So might have to do the bevels manually sometimes, or you use weighted bevels. In that case, we have to apply the solidify. Now, when we look at it, these, for example, like basically, if you shade auto smooth and you apply that, you go back into edit mode, Control E and mark sharps right there. Symmetrize. And we can grab one sharp edge, Shift G, select by sharpness, press N, add a mean bevel weight to everything that's sharp. Okay. At least what's sharp. And that will give us, with a bevel modifier, we can use weight now. Okay. And that should bevel that one now accordingly. But that's a good starting point at least, right? So that piece wasn't maybe quite as crazy as you thought it was going to be to do. It's not entirely proper topology. And so, you know, we still have these corners in here that we got to work out, possibly. If you apply that bevel, look in edit mode now, we get this number going on. Some of these do kind of right. They kind of collapse back down, which is cool. Other ones, not so much. So we still have to go in and think about, you know, this is going to need more density. A pretty long video. I wasn't planning on doing this long, but some of you guys need to see it, right? I think you enjoy it. So you watch the whole thing. Props to you, because not everybody makes it to the end, but that's how you do it. Like, if you need more density, you need more density. Just cut them a little bit cleaner, maybe. Then the rest of this down here, you can localize density on flat surfaces by doing redirects. It's like half of an inset, right? 2 end poles. Sometimes you can get away with that. Doesn't sculpt very well this way, but it's something you might be able to get away with, right? Otherwise, the alternative is maybe make sure I can dissolve these. There, nothing goes away. Okay. Yeah. Otherwise, the alternative is you add more loop cuts, maybe, you know, because this is pretty, it's not very curvy forward and backwards. It's more curvy on the sides. So a lot of times you can add more loop cuts in this direction. If we start adding loop cuts in this direction, it starts to screw things up. All right. We could try the set flow add-on. Sometimes that works. Sometimes it doesn't. And you have to do these things by eye even, which is really freaking frustrating. Which is what I did for a long time in Blender anyways, because there was no that flow add-on for the longest time, and it was annoying, but that's what I would end up doing. Things by eye, and it's just a pain, right? But basically, you can see we can go through here. We can make things happen. Apparently, this did not work out the way I thought it was going to. We had those extra edges. You don't always need a bevel necessarily, right? Density can sometimes be used in lieu of that. Trying to get it to a more reduced state, and then we'll kind of knock that out. Maybe symmetrize. I think we're good enough. It might not be perfect, but like you do a level of subdivision, apply it maybe, who knows. We get something like this and get it smooth, clear sharps, clear the bevel weights, clean it up maybe a little bit. And so this is a solid base for a high detail sculpt, because now you see the banding effects. This is if your edges aren't balanced, they start doing stuff like that. Not usually what you want on a big surface. You can use relax slide tool again. You could try holding shift with that and letting those relax apart a little bit with the relax slide tool. But it probably won't work out too well. You could reduce the sculpt size. You could try doing it at lower resolution. It might help out better. Okay. But this is better to solve before you even get to the sculpting part. Okay. All I'm trying to point out there. But the whole idea was that we can get in here and start sculpting now. You don't have to necessarily use the multi-res to sculpt. Like you can use voxels still if you want to go switch back to a voxel setup. But you just want to have this clean looking mesh. But yeah, now you get the opportunity to go in here. Like this is supposed to be wood, right? And like we all know, or wood or polymer, depending on the model or whatever. Oh, that's an error. Whoops. I didn't realize I did that over here. You could probably smooth that out even to some degree, maybe. Now we'd have to fix that first before we come in here. So check and inspect things first. But yeah, basically it's supposed to be wood. So to have little slight, wear and tear that is really hard to do with just straight poly modeling, because it requires too much detail perhaps. So you can always get away with this potentially on your models, right? Smooth them out even a little. Because those edges get too sharp sometimes, especially for video games, right? And that's all you do. And you do this one piece and part of the model at a time. Don't get too carried away with this though. Like you don't have to sculpt on it forever and a day. Just get it looking well enough for your project, And that's kind of what's critical there is just getting it looking well enough because you have a lot more to work on, It's not just this one part. So like if you want to scrape down like the front edges a little bit, smooth them or whatever, you do that and then you just move on, right? You don't have to stand here all day or sit here all day and do this 100% like the best ever super high detailed sculpt with all the grains of wood in it and everything. Maybe bigger chunks of damage, but not like not super fine stuff. Do that in Substance, Like if you're gonna add lettering, like sculpting it, maybe not. You could do floaters perhaps a little bit easier, but just in Substance again is probably the better bet, right? Use Substance, guys. I'm telling you right now. You guys want to try to texture in Blender. Give up on that idea. Get Substance Painter. Texture in Substance Painter. Trust me. When that goes and is no longer on Steam, right, as a perpetual license for indie, I will no longer talk about Substance Painter, all right? I will tell you guys not to use it. But until then, Substance Painter is the way to go. And if Marmoset ever catches up to Substance, they're going to be in for a world of hurt because I think Marmoset might be better in the long run. Because I don't suspect Adobe's going to keep it as a perpetual forever. Not for sure, obviously, but I don't suspect they will. I think there's going to be some kind of contract that they have to keep with, and eventually they'll just give up on that idea. And that day comes, we'll move to Marmoset, all right? That'll be what happens. The Instamat program, I never really got into because the Baker was kind of weird, and some of the options in there is kind of a little bit odd to me, but if you want to try Instamat, try that. Instamat? Yeah, Instamat. I think that's the name. But yeah, you see where it goes. It's pretty simple, right? Like it's pretty simple and straightforward after you realize like you've probably been overcomplicating it for no reason. I mean, if this was more like a polymer setup. What was the warning? I didn't read it. A non-uniform scale? Apply scale real quick. Probably should have did that the first time. But anyways, it probably messed up the sculpt somehow. Almost guarantee it. But if this was like a polymer frame where it has all that interesting detail on the surface, you could, in theory at least. Oh, we did the top one, not the bottom one. That's one. Okay. You could, in theory, go through here and sculpt it all. It's very hard to do sometimes. Unless it's like a real simple design, maybe. But it might be a possibility. And I just wanted to mention that real quick anyways. Because you might have like a height map that you create in 2D. It might actually be easier to just slap it on here in 3D. But instead of polymodeling all of it. I see a lot of guys polymodeling that kind of stuff, and I don't think that's a good idea necessarily. Okay, that's what I'm talking about there, anyways. Like if you have to, you have to. I get it, but if you don't, yeah, don't do that. Let's use dots instead. I was gonna fill this area. If you have machine tools, you should be able to do page down. Use a turntable. That's the option. It's usually in preferences under key map or navigation or whatever. But machine put it on that down page down pie menu, which is kind of cool. But I'd rather it just be up here at the top personally. Whatever. That'd be sick if Blender did that. All right. Anyways, all I was showing is that we can continue sculpting it. Basically, we can smooth this out a bit and inflate these surfaces a tiny bit, maybe. Man, that is touchy. Why is that so touchy right now? That's the question. Because the object's realistically scaled, and Blender doesn't have like a wheel to help you do this a little bit easier, which is unfortunate. But also, I don't think it's very dense, so let's smooth it again. Yeah, we got to smooth it and increase contrast because it wasn't very dense, and now we got to smooth it out. So very touchy. I hope they fix that issue with everything being so touchy. That's a real big issue in my opinion because it's really hard to do finesse work on anything small. Also, the voxel remesher has an issue with smaller objects. And I'm not talking very small objects here. I mean, weapons are like a meter long usually, right? So it's not that small necessarily. It's not like we're doing one thousandth of an inch on the mechanical side of things, you know, for a weapon. But anyways, yeah, if that was like some kind of black polymer instead of wood or whatever, you get the idea. You could actually start sculpting those kinds of things in with like using the layer tool and masks and whatever else you got to do, right? So you'd actually be able to pull those off a little bit easier to some degree with sculpting, unless they're very complex arrangements. And on the AKs, like the different types of magazines, like the waffle mags or the bottom piece here usually has like a bunch of lines in it and stuff. You might still have to model some things like that to some degree. It can be quite problematic. You can try sculpting it. You can try modeling it. Modeling, I think, is going to take you longer. Sculpting is going to be you're going to feel a little bit less more out of control doing it, right? Because you have to think about exactly how you're going to layer things up, and you got to get it right the first time because there's no like undo button. If you start sculpting a bunch of other stuff on top of it, like you run out of options there. You can't work in layers necessarily unless you have the sculpt layers add-on, which usually works pretty well, but sometimes it forgets that you were using layers and it stops working. So it depends on what happens with the mesh. For some reason, the vertex counts or orders change or something randomly on the meshes. And I don't know why it does that, but that makes this add-on stop working because of that reason. So pretty sure that's a Blender issue, by the way. I'm not just this add-ons issue. Which would be nice if they updated that too, right? So Blender has a lot of room for improvement for sculpting, modeling. It's not perfect software. I just want to end it here with this note. It can do a lot. It's pretty reliable as far as like being able to create something. But there are definitely things in here that are going to make you struggle if you're coming from other software. Okay. So if you're coming from Max or Maya, there are features over there that just Blender does not have. And I don't know if it ever will. A lot of people have been asking for this kind of stuff for a long time. We don't ever see it included. So just keep that in mind. It's going to be a little bit more difficult to work with in some respects compared to the workflows you might be used to. It's definitely a new learning curve, and it's pretty challenging, to be honest. But a lot of the whole video here, anyways, the whole idea of this video is not just for the guy that was asking the question. You know, like it'll help him out too to understand this kind of process. But for everybody else, you know, even if you're more advanced, you know, this hopefully helps you out a lot. And the Yeah, for the guy asking the question, yeah, it's over. It feels like a lot of work because it is a lot of work. Subdivision is a lot of work. Creating high fidelity models is a lot of work. Um, there's no way around that at all. Like you will have to do every single edge and every little detail unless you have some kind of automated process that runs through Houdini and Substance and everything else. Some studios have like their own pipelines that they don't do all this, right? This is just the way it goes, as is with kind of the tools you got at this time, right? So probably won't ever see those in-house studio tools ever become public either, because it involves too much setup and process. And companies that are making games, they're not interested in making necessarily tools to sell. They're more interested in making games and having their pipelines set up so that they can make games efficiently and effectively and fast and fun and playable and have a little bit of control over it so they can debug it and test things and put out different versions and all that um, localization of text and voices and stuff. So they have their huge systems that they have. Well, they make a lot of systems, at least for their studios, so they can even make games. And then as a result, you're just left with a DCC of like Blender, Maya, Max. You're not going to have, not every tool's the most amazing tool in every aspect. So that's why you have other tools like Rhizome UV and so on and so forth. And add-ons too, because I mean, Blender's UV mapping is pretty rough. Let's just be honest. If they just created something like text tools, but like a simpler, stripped down version of it, most people would be happy with it. Really, I think they should make it for Blender vanilla, anyways, or something similar. Text tools, UV toolkit, almost kind of the same things. And then Packmaster, of course, I don't expect Blender to actually do this, but that's a requirement in my opinion. So the all in all, like weapons and firearms and whatnot, you can do it. Props you can do in a similar fashion. They don't always have to even be this involved necessarily. Like if you're not worried about doing sculpted edges and stuff, don't worry about it. If all you need is the bevel, and go for it. If you want to add damage to the edges in Substance, that's another option. You don't have to do it here. You can add details like this even in Substance by painting height maps, right? A lot of guys do that. They create the kind of base forms that just look nice, that bake nice beveled edges. And then they go to Substance and they paint in all the extra details they want on a surface. And then they take those two normal maps and combine them together. And then they create curvature maps and so on and so forth. There's all kinds of weird workflows, right? But just controlling mesh and subdivision and feeling comfortable with it. I mean, this is it right here. This density at some VFX studios, they'd probably say it's too much anyways. So you might have to actually model all this and try to keep it a little lower poly perhaps. And that's just what happens, guys. There's different requirements for different projects. But before you know it, you got it worked out, and it all starts to make sense and it works out for you. So hopefully an hour and 30 minutes of this rambling helps you out quite a bit. It's kind of a hard question to answer in general because it is involved, right? And so how do you make it easier? By trying to stay disciplined on each sub-object and just really thinking about, like what is the strategy you want to use to make it? Does it start as a sub-D mesh that you sculpt, or is it a blockout that you refine into subdivision that you multi-res, or maybe you go back to voxels and then you retopo it again later on? I mean, you can always mix everything up. It's not like one size fits all for every object. Don't be afraid of them though. Like, don't be afraid of pushing and pulling polygons around, cutting edges up, beveling them, using modifiers. Once you get over all that idea of like you can mesh up obviously very quickly if you're a beginner by just doing something like a bevel or an inset might go crazy sometimes. And usually that has to do with the topology. But once you kind of get the handle on creating shapes and feeling comfortable with merging and orbiting in the view and doing all that, suddenly, like doing loop cuts and knife cuts, suddenly your whole world opens up because now you're just looking at this thing. Like, this is just a cylinder with an extrusion. This is just a plane that's solidified, or this, you know what I'm saying? Your whole world opens up. All you need now is quadded mesh for the most part and holding edges, right? And if it's quadded up enough, you don't even have to do the holding edges. Like, you don't have to, but it'd still be preferable usually. But yeah, it's one of those things, guys. And then later on, you realize that you can do like booleans and voxel remeshing and quad remeshing, and you can just end up with a high poly off quad remesher sometimes, you know? It depends on how the results come out, but and then if that doesn't work, you just retopo it and you're done. You know, like you got your high poly exactly the way you want it. There's a lot of back and forth between the different tools. It's not just Boolean Ngon workflow. Like you can do a subdivision mesh and then Boolean the crap out of it, right? Fun. And then, but you have to retopo it, or you have to quad remesh it, or something. You'll have to do something to make it better, basically, right? Or more proper, if that's what you're going for. In your portfolio, a lot of guys get portfolios wrong. They're like, oh, I'm just making portfolio piece. You have to kind of demonstrate what it is that you're doing in your portfolio. If you're making game objects, you're doing high to low poly baking. A studio art director is not going to care if you use technically improper subdivision to make a high poly model, as long as you're like explaining, like, hey, you know, I use triangles and Ngons during the subdivision process to save time and speed up, so that I can make this a little bit more effectively and faster. Because not everything needs to be perfect quad topo, right? You can use Ngons, you can use triangles. You just want to use them smartly, so that where they're on flat surfaces or where they don't distort the shading a whole lot and things like that, right? Stuff like that. So now when it comes to actually using a subdivision mesh that's high poly with UV maps, you're probably not going to want to use too many Ngons or triangles, right? Because it's harder to unwrap things with Ngons and triangles, generally speaking. Or poles, should I say, even. Not just triangles, it's poles, like end poles, E-poles, things like that. You want to be careful with where they're placed and how they lay out and whatnot, so that you can still contort and manipulate the UVs in ways that you might need to, or straighten them out, or whatever the case, right? All right, so that's it for this video. It was a whole whopping hour and 35 minutes, 36 minutes now. Yeah, that's a big video, guys. Easy to get me going off in a direction, a runaway train, just talking about all kinds of things and demoing it. Hope you enjoyed. If you made it to the end, absolutely appreciate the views. And so if you're not subscribed already, please do so. It was nice to get new subscribers, but that's it for this one anyways. I hope you enjoyed, and I'll check you out in the next one. All right, take care.